Serena Pariser taught for many years as an English teacher, mostly in San Diego and 1 year in Philadelphia. She has experience working in some of the most challenging school settings from coast to coast. In addition to her extensive experience in urban school settings, she also has experience in affluent schools and has truly seen all sides of education. Serena was humbled to be recognized as Teacher of the Year at Gompers Preparatory Academy. Her passions include progressive classroom management, best practices, bringing curriculum to life, time management for teachers, and weaving character education into the curriculum. She presents on these topics at educational conferences around the country. She worked as Assistant Director of Field Experience at the University of San Diego, where she has a broader influence on new teachers entering the profession. Serena is the best-selling author of Real Talk About Classroom Management, Real Talk About Time Management, and her most recent book, Answers to Your Biggest Questions About Creating a Dynamic Classroom, which is the topic of today's webinar. Now I'll turn it over to Serena Pariser.
Hello, thank you, Margaret, and hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So as Margaret was saying, yes, I published 3 books most recently, just last month, Answers to Your Biggest Questions About Creating a Dynamic Classroom, launched. And I want to start out with a little story about what this book's really about. I was walking with my 5-year-old niece around Lake Harriet in Minneapolis the other day where I live. And she looked up at me and said, "Who are you?" And I looked down at her a little bit confused because I've been in her life about every day for the past 4 years. And I said, "I'm your Aunt Serena," like getting a little bit concerned. And she said, "No, who are you?" And I said, "No, I'm your Aunt Serena." Now I started thinking, do I have to call her dad or have like a doctor's appointment? And then she said, "No, like, what do you do?" And she said, "I know you write books, but like, what kind of books?" And so because she's only 5, I said, "I write books for teachers to make their classrooms more fun." And then I thought about what I really wrote about, and it's a lot more than that. It's about creating a dynamic classroom. And what a dynamic classroom is, it's a classroom that's collaborative, it's engaging, the kids are excited, the teacher's excited, and there's positive energy flowing. And that's where learning can really happen. So that's what I'm going to talk to you today about, creating a dynamic classroom, not one where you're just thriving or surviving. You can find me on any social media platform with my full name, Serena Pariser. It's not a very common name, so it kind of works out that way. And so let's get started. When my co-author and I thought about what we need to do to make a dynamic classroom, we kind of did a brain dump and we divided it into 5 sections. And the first section on the right, this is my table of contents, is how do you build an affirming classroom community? And community is ever so important. I didn't realize this in my first year of teaching. I was hired to teach 6th grade math, and I was credentialed to teach 7th through 12th English. This is before No Child Left Behind, not to give away my age, but basically the classroom needed a teacher. And as a first-year teacher incoming, I just wanted my own classroom. So I took the job, and I finally realized, or actually I soon realized, that teaching 6th grade math is much different than knowing 6th grade math. Needless to say, the picture on the left was my classroom on a really good day. The students were verbally yelling at each other, yelling at me. It was a very negative and hostile environment most days. However, there were some days on Fridays where I brought in a huge bag of candy and put it on my lap because we were playing multiplication bingo on Fridays, and the students knew this. And the candy was the prize. And so I would sit at the front of the classroom the days the kids came in so wound up. It was Friday, there was candy. And the only tool I had to get them quiet is to put the candy on my lap and hope that someone, like if Jose would see it and say, "Yo, teacher has candy." And they would say, "SHUTUP." And they would start yelling at each other to be quiet, which didn't really help the situation if you've got classes that have done that. But eventually they yelled at each other enough where they realized they just wanted the candy. And I didn't want to add to the yelling in the room, but that's the only way I could get the students quiet. Those Fridays with a big $5 bag of candy. And that's not a dynamic classroom. To have a dynamic classroom, one of the questions that might linger in your head is, how do I energize a sleepy class or wake up a calm class, or calm down a wound up class? So you can either take the energy down or bring it up, and you can do it without a bag of candy. And so we walk you through how to do this. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the activities that works. It's called Stand If You, and it looks like this in a classroom. It works for really any grade, any subject. And I like to use it in the beginning of a classroom or during the lesson, but I want you to see and feel like what it actually does for the energy of a classroom. So because you're at your homes, or maybe you're watching with colleagues somewhere, or maybe you're driving, if you're able to stand up when I say something, then stand up. If you just want to raise your hand because maybe you're driving or something like that. But remember, in a classroom, the students really would be standing for each one of these. So let's try it, and then we'll discuss afterwards what it can do for the energy of the classroom. Stand if you like pizza more than hamburgers. All right, sit down. If you want to type a little bit in the chat, you can. And just a disclaimer, in a classroom, you can either have the kids be quiet doing it, or if you're comfortable with a little chatter, it kind of helps them get to know each other too. Stand if you have watched more than one Corwin webinar in the past. Like, this is not your first Corwin webinar. Stand up. All right, sit down. Stand if you have a pet in your house, apartment, or place you reside. A pet. Okay, sit down. And this is exactly what I'd be doing as a teacher, the way I'm interacting with you now. Stand if you, this coming school year, are going to be teaching elementary or those wild middle schoolers. All right, sit down. Stand if you are going to be teaching high school. And sit down. Stand if you are going to be teaching something other than K-12, or you're an administrator, supervisor, in leadership, something like that. Teacher, coach. All right, sit down. Stand if you truly believe that all classrooms can be transformed into a dynamic learning environment. You truly believe every single classroom can. There's no right or wrong here. All right, sit down. Stand if you think Coke is better than Pepsi. And these type of questions really get the kids talking, and then you add in the academic. Stand if you would rather actually drink water than drink soda. All right, sit down. Stand if you feel like you did a pretty good job with self-care and work-life balance this past school year, or if you're just graduating this past semester. All right, sit down. Stand if you last school year used a strategy that you saw in a colleague's classroom and you kind of like took it and made it your own, or they told you about something you learned from a colleague. All right, sit down. And stand if you just finished your first year teaching. Nice job if you did. Sit down in June. Stand if you are going into your year 1 through 5 teaching. Sit down. And stand if you are going into your 5+ year teaching, whatever that may be. And you're welcome to write in the chat what year you're going into. And stand if you think you could use this activity in your classroom this coming year. All right. So this is really simple, and I want to ask you, and maybe write it in the chat, do you think this would calm down a class or bring the energy up if they're sleepy? So would it bring the energy down or bring the energy up? Okay. The answer is it actually does both. It can actually wake up a sleepy class, or if the kids come in after lunch and like, and you have to like read a story or have them do silent independent reading. This is a great activity for students to be bouncing up and down in their seat and talking, and they need to be surprised how they're willing to learn after this activity, either way. So this is a really powerful activity to change the energy in a classroom in about 5 minutes. But why is it beneficial? It's beneficial because if you weave what you're teaching into the questions, it's also a quick check for understanding. Now that's a lot. That means like, yeah, you want to have the fun ones, like stand if you've ever done this or have this in your house or how many brothers and sisters you may have. But then if you say something like, let's say in an English classroom, stand if you know the difference between a simile and a metaphor. And you just taught that yesterday and half the class stands up, you know, you might just say, the students that are standing, just tell the students that are sitting what it is. Or, you know, let's address that in 2 minutes because I can tell half the class isn't standing. It builds relationships in a classroom, not only from teacher to student. You can see like who the only child is, who likes to read before they go to bed, who doesn't like to read before they go to bed, but also student to student. So they can be like, oh, Amy actually also broke her leg before. And maybe those two students will start to get to know each other. It gets energy out and puts the focus on the lesson and you're ready. The students, it's hard not to laugh during this with the silly ones. And every student loves to talk about themselves. So it's very contextualized towards getting to know the individual. It gets students laughing. As we know, laughing lowers the affective filter in the brain, basically, and we can go very deep into this, but we all know this pretty much, that when you laugh, your brain's actually more open to learning afterwards. If they're calm, if they're tense or tired or angry, let's say something happened before class, they're probably not in the mood to learn. So this, I call it a game sometimes, activity, game. If you call it a game, they're going to want to do it more. But it gets them laughing and talking. And the goal is that you want kids moving, whether they're too wound up or they're falling asleep. Moving will help them be ready to learn. And it's up to your own comfort level to see how much you want them talking in between. It's up to you. Now, it seems like a lot of prep, but here's the goal to making it work. This is actually a list I had next to my my desk this summer at summer school. And I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that were ready to go. Because if a class comes in wound up, you are not thinking at your 100% capacity. You're probably stressed. You're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And you're kind of in fight or flight. You're not going to take the time to make this list. By the time you take the time to make this list, they could have been doing all sorts of stuff around the room. Or if they are sleepy, this list comes in handy. You want to just be able to grab it off. I tape it up to the side of my desk because if you put it on the desk, you know what happens to it. It get lost in that pile of papers. So have a list, like a page or two of things that you can just grab when the students come in. You just go, okay, grab, and you can go to that stand up you activity right away. Or you can actually use it in the middle of a lesson to kind of do a transition or switch it up. But have a list ready, and when a thought pops in your head about a good one, put it on the list. Just keep adding to it. Another thing we can do to calm down, I think more often students come into our class more wound up is an issue. And that's hard to do without raising your voice or sitting with a 5-pound bag of candy on your lap. But there's something you can do. It's called 4-7-8 breathing. Has anyone ever heard of 4-7-8 breathing? Just type if you have in the chat. Okay. We might think of like yoga classes or something like that, but honestly, this breathing is coming more into the academic forum. It's coming into college classrooms. It's coming into businesses before meetings are started. So let's try it now. This is something either we can do as a teacher to get ready for the day, or we can calm down a class that's wound up. And if students are sleepy and they do this breathing, it will probably wake them up and put oxygen into their head. So we're going to hold in for we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds. We're going to hold for 7. And the longest is going to be when we breathe out for 8. Let's try this 3 times. Ready? In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Type in the chat how you feel now, how you feel differently than when you started the breathing. Do you feel more calm? Do you feel more energized? And how could this benefit a classroom? Okay. So you could even have a picture of this next to your desk, maybe just so you know, and stick it on the doc cam before you do it, or just a picture to remember, like I have this tool, so you could have stand if you, the list, and the breathing here. And so when you're kind of in fight or flight, when the kids come in and they just need to get energy out or get energy put in them, especially if they're older, like juniors, seniors in high school, that you have these 2 tools you can rely on to change the energy of a classroom quickly. All right, so that's our first question addressed. Now, next, there's this quote from Corwin that really resonates to me, and it says, "I'm a teacher. I love what I do." And I think a lot of times during the past school year, and maybe the past 2 or 3 years especially, or if you were in a teacher training program, you question this, and some days you felt like you weren't making a difference. And sometimes you didn't know if you were pushing the rock up a hill at all. But I'm here to tell you that those days are days when you are making a difference, no matter how small it is, just being a teacher in that classroom. So I want you to hold on to the fact that we had some pretty tough years, but you are a teacher and you're the energetic leader of that classroom, and that's ever so important. So those days when you feel like nothing's really going your way and you're not really making a difference, just know that you are. Often we're the hardest critics on ourselves. Especially if you're a newer teacher in the field, or a newer teacher at your school. The thing about newer teachers is that newer teachers are gold mines because they are the freshest trained teachers in the field. Look at all these things. I mean, I couldn't even fit all of them in here. Blended learning, student choice, problem project, based learning, critical inquiry, trauma-informed teaching. There's SEL, restorative justice, morning meetings, empathy-based teaching, differentiated instruction, 24. I could go on and on. But newer teachers are the freshest trained eyes in the field. And I want you to remember, when you see those newer teachers on your campus, or if you are a newer teacher, that bring the knowledge you have to the classroom. You have more knowledge with maybe not experience, but more knowledge with up-to-date pedagogy than Mrs. Smith down the hall, that may seem to have it all down, but she's been doing the same thing for 20 plus years or 10 plus years. So share what you know and be confident in bringing to the classroom what you know. You're the freshest trained minds in the field. So hold on to that. The next question is one of my favorite questions that might be lingering in the mind of a teacher, is how do I connect with the student that challenges me? Okay, raise your hand, type in the chat if you've never had a student that challenges you. You're either the luckiest teacher in the world, or you're kind of lying. So the point is, teaching is, we're all going to have those students that challenge us, and that's a wonderful thing. But what my co-author and I did is we wanted to put a section on chapter 2 is how do I keep kids or students at the center, student-centered learning? And a lot of it is, I'm going to address this now specifically. How can I connect with the student that challenges you? And I learned this the hard way, trial by fire, as most of us do. My 4th year teaching, I think, I had a student that will forever stick in my head named Alan. And I first met Alan when I was an 8th grade teacher, and I'd been there for like 6 or 7 years. I mean, I had street cred. I taught a lot of their older brothers and sisters, and the students were really connected with me in the classroom. I was asked to cover a 7th grade teacher's prep. And I thought, oh, no big deal. First of all, I'm 8th grade teacher. The kids know me. I'm going into a 7th grade class. I shouldn't have to do much to connect with the students and have the learning continue as I'm in there. This teacher just had to go to an IEP meeting. And I walked in the class, and the students were all, doing work. The teacher had the work set up, the assignment, and I sat down, and my biggest thing was to take attendance, as you know, when you cover a colleague's class. And I started taking attendance, and a boy got up out of his seat, Alan, walked over to the door, and I looked at him as if I was shocked. And he looked back at me, his hair kind of flapped back, and he said, I have a 503 plan or a 504 plan, look it up. And that was it. And he spit up what I would think is a big ball of spit wad and spit it on the floor and just sauntered out of the room, not telling me where he was going. And he said, I get breaks. It wasn't really what he said, it's the way he said it. So I knew this child was going to need a little bit more love. The next year in 8th grade, guess who walked into my classroom? First day of school, period 3, I remember, was Alan. And first day of school, he sat on the desk. He put his hands behind his back like this. He put his feet up on the desk, crossed them, and said, what are we learning today, teach? Day 1. So hopefully this doesn't happen to you day 1, but it can. And Alan was what I like to call a connection student. And that means that he needed to know that I liked him or knew anything about him before he was going to learn from me. And so the other thing about Alan is I knew that he wanted and needed attention, and that's okay. So what I started doing is he kind of did whatever he wanted in the classroom, including during independent reading time. He would just sing on the top of his lungs. And I had the students all reading. I mean, this was not an easy feat, all reading for 20, 25 minutes a day. And I was conferencing with them, and it was silent independent reading. And Alan just wanted attention, and he told me, I don't like reading. And so I started asking him questions about a skateboard, which somehow he got into our classroom, even though he wasn't supposed to, but he got it into the classroom past the dean's office. I started asking him skateboarding questions, which I knew nothing about. So I had to use the help of Google and look up what an ollie is, I can't remember now, some kind of flip thing, a majiggy. And he started showing me pictures of him skating at the park after school. And he was actually really good. And so I knew that that was a way to tap into Alan and get to know him better. And so I started printing out skateboarding articles about like Tony Hawk or controversial, should you be allowed to skateboard on college campuses or things like that. And guess what? Alan started reading during reading time because he knew that I was actually interested in him. And whether he was reading for my approval or to actually find out what was in the article, he was reading. And then that kind of turned into, he started doing work in classroom because he was getting accepted academically. And so if I didn't take that time to reach out and ask him about his life, the bridge wouldn't have been there because he's a connection student. So how many of you, type in the chat, have had connection students in your classroom? Some people call them connection students, connection kids, where they needed to know that you liked them as a human being before they did any work for you, because that's who they're doing it for a lot of times. Okay. So the thing about challenging students or even connection kids, which a lot of time are challenging students, but challenging students want to be treated like everybody else. And that's tricky because you think in your head as a teacher, then why don't they act like everyone else? But they want to be treated like everyone else. They want you to say their name like everyone else. Instead of saying, Alan, are we going to have a good day? Being like, hi, Alan, how are you? Good morning. Because you wouldn't say that to every student. They're often connection kids. I already talked about that, but I'll say it again, is they're kids that need you to like them before they learn from you. And the way you can show that you like them is ask them questions about their life. And they're often viewed from a deficit-based lens rather than an asset-based lens. So think about that. Alan was really talented at skateboarding, but his reading level was far below grade level. So the fact that I was seeing him in something he excelled at, he then felt confident instead of me as the English teacher pointing out his reading level. So see them through an asset-based lens. What's something they're kind of good at? Is that DJing? Is that drawing? Is it being a good friend? A lot of times it's not academic. And so this is a picture Alan actually, I asked him and he emailed it to me. And this is him doing, okay, you know, I don't know what he's doing, but some sort of flip. If you know what this is, or type it in the chat, some sort of trick, maybe an ollie, but he's jumping over something. But either way, this is pretty cool for someone in 8th grade to be able to do that. And so we hung this picture up on a family board, and I'm going to talk about family boards later on with making relationships, but I valued him from an asset-based lens so much that I printed out this picture and hung it in the classroom. And he used to look at it and then start doing work, because remember, he was a connection student that could have been one of the most challenging. He was oftentimes one of the most challenging students in the grade level, except in our classroom. And so it took a lot of work behind the scenes. So what can you do with challenging students and connection? Because it's so vital that you connect with these students that are asking for a little bit more love. Pay attention to the small details that might expose you to their out of school interests. Ask questions about these interests to get to know them better. Not general questions like, so what do you like to do out of class? They'll say, because they're middle school kids, or they might give you an answer and that's great, but be prepared for the, I don't know. Ask about stickers they have on, ask about the cool new shoes they're wearing, ask about something that they physically are showing you they're interested in. With challenging students, you can do behavior contracts. And I discussed that in the book on page 31. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Orletta Wynn, actually made one that we have permission to use. And so I edited it, and it's a behavior contract you can actually use without any prep, and they're amazing. And that's for the most challenging students. The other thing that's important, and this is kind of under the umbrella of this topic, is know how important relationships are in a classroom. Yes, we hear that all the time, right? But I dug deep and looked at the research about it. And what I found was fascinating about teacher-student relationships and how it relates to classroom management and connecting with challenging students. So there was a study in 2003 by Robert Marzano and colleagues, and after analyzing more than 100 studies on classroom management, Robert Marzano and colleagues concluded that classrooms where teachers had strong relationships with the students, there was a decrease in disruptions by 31%. 31%. That's insanely large. So if you're taking the time to make relationships and foster relationships with your students, research says that your behavior disruptions will decrease by 31%. But there's a problem. So taking relationships takes time, right? Now, if you're an elementary school teacher, you may have, let's say, 25 to 35 students in a day, but you see them all day. If you're a middle or high school teacher, you could have over 200 students that you see throughout the week, different students. In the chat, type how many students you have this year total or last year, meaning that how many papers did you have to grade? How many names were on your roster combined last school year? And you'll see that it's probably over 150 for middle and high school teachers. So that's the issue with relationships, is that we might not have all the time, right? We're one human being. And so I use this because it's ever so relevant. There's a teacher that says, Ariella, how much attention do you need from me? And Ariella, the student, says, all of it. So how many of you can type it in the chat or just nod your head. How many of you haven't had an Ariella in any of your years teaching, or more than one? Yeah. So that's the issue, because we might have too many students, but it's vital that we make relationships. So what I did is we talked about strategies to efficiently build relationships with students. When I say efficiently, I mean more than one-on-one. So that comes sometimes, but you can't do that every single day with 150 students or 100 students. It might mean 2-on-1. It might mean 4-on-1. It might mean you're connecting with 10 students efficiently, but you're building the connection rather than full class. And so there's something I use on my page 40 that I got from a book, Put Happiness to Work by Eric Karpinski. And he found this research that says, research has shown that successful intimate relationships need about 5 positive support interactions for each critical, challenging one. And this, when it says intimate relationships, that could mean a relationship with your good friend, with a parent or your children, an intimate relationship. It could be a romantic partner, but it's also a teacher-student relationship, because you see these students oftentimes more than they see their parents. You can see these students more than you see your best friend, or maybe even your partner at home, depending on your work schedules. So there is important that we do 5 positive support interactions for each critical, challenging one. And where can we have these interactions? So strategies to efficiently build relationships is you can hold morning meetings or circle meetings. Once or twice a week works really nicely. If you want to do more, great, where you're building those positive relationships with those students in pretty much non-academic way. So who here has ever done morning meetings and you saw how that built relationships? Using students' names as often as possible is so simple, but so important. There are students that went through an entire school year with them saying the teacher didn't know my name. And guess what? They probably failed the class. And maybe we've been guilty of it as teachers, but I'm saying stop now. We have to learn student names. And so I myself tend to struggle with learning names, but I have devices in the classroom that help me. For example, I use little Post-it notes and I put the desk and I write their first name or their preferred nickname on there that I'll use during class. And every time I address them, I use their name. And you can see how that connection will build when you use student names. Have you ever gone to a dinner party and someone didn't remember your name and you could tell? Didn't you feel a little disconnected from that person, or someone remembered your name? The opposite. Use their names when speaking to them and do whatever you have to do to have that done. Having a seating chart in your hand when you're walking around the classroom, the first couple of weeks really helps, or having it on your desk as you're calling on students. Celebrate or recognizing birthdays is a great way for you to build those connections efficiently with students. You can even delegate that task to a student. You don't have to do that. And it could be 2 students or 3 students love working with each other that say, okay, this month we have Johnny, Jose, and Sarai. Now we're just going to recognize them. Get to know me activities, icebreakers. Sometimes they only take like 1 to 3 minutes, but they pay out in dividends. When doing station learning, that's when students rotate table to table. Let's say they're writing an essay. And in the first table, they're looking at grammar. The second table, they're looking at their figurative language. The third table, they're looking at something else. One of the stations can be you or a co-teacher adult in the classroom checking in with them on a personal level, like, how's it going? And they rotate to you. And so you have that 5 minutes with, let's say, 5 to 7 students. It's a check-in station. That's a great way to build those relationships efficiently. When you can, attend school sports, extracurricular, especially if you have a classroom. Let's say you have a classroom where you have 10 varsity basketball players or middle school basketball players, or elementary school, and they're kind of giving you a hard time in class, like they're not sitting in their seat, they're walking around the room, they're not following instructions. If you show up to one of their basketball games, they're going to know, and you're going to see those students from an asset-based lens. So keep in mind, what type of extracurriculars or sports are a lot of your students in, especially the ones that are challenging you. But it's a great way to build a relationship, just them coming up and talking to you after the game and just saying, hey, Miss Pariser, what'd you think? Did you see da-da-da? Great way. Using note cards to have students write down what they're into outside of classroom, maybe like the first week of school, and refer to it when needed. So if you have a student that's kind of pulling away, you can kind of be like, oh, I remember that Sarah's really into volleyball. I can ask her about that. But it's a great way to know how to connect with them on a non-academic level. Okay. So I talked a little bit about Alan and the picture of him skateboarding. The picture is on the right. I printed it out in color. But family boards are one of the easiest ways, I think, the most least effort on your part to connect with the students in a non-academic way. So I called it a family board, and I had 4 periods in middle school, and I didn't have a different board for period 1, period 2. It was just any student I taught, we're all family. And I hung up pictures of students on here that they would email me, or I'd see it on their phone and ask if they could email it to me. And I'd print out paper copies. I like paper just because you can see it right there. And it was a part of the board, and they basically were seen and heard in a different way. There's a student up top. She's reading nicely on an iPad. There's Alan doing the trick I don't know the name of, but I did when I taught that year, let's call it an ollie. I'm probably wrong. Let's call it an ollie there. And there's on the bottom, we have 4 students working really nicely. On the left, we had some field trips we went to. So I mixed up, and on the top left, it's a selfie with me and one of my students. And so the thing about this is, look how many students are seen and heard at one time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, and then all the students in this group picture. You're efficiently building relationships with like 25 students by just hanging these pictures up. And then I had the students do them in kid speak, I call it, hashtag they understood what it all was, but I don't know, like Mad Kong fan. They tried to explain that to me. I kind of got it, something with videos and I don't know, but they liked it. And basically it was their board. And the thing about this board is, going back to challenging students, these shouldn't be your best students in class, the students that kind of do whatever, not that those are best, the students that maybe don't need that extra love and encouragement, they're always going to do the work and be fine. This is any student is seen and heard. So often it's the students that are challenging us and we don't have a relationship with, that we need to put their picture up here. Because this is not star student of the week. This is different. This is having students being seen and heard and building those relationships. And you can change this out, like maybe change out one picture at a time, like once every 2 weeks or whenever they come. And then I also let the kids do like artwork and things like that. So if you look on the bottom right, there's a guy with a very interesting mustache and he's like half monster and he's saying hi. I had a student that literally slept through his morning classes. He sometimes didn't sleep at night. He was up playing video games, but he slept through all of the morning classes, woke up around noon. So needless to say, he wasn't doing any work and he was failing. And this is a 9th grade boy. And you know how detrimental that can be, especially in 9th grade. And so he came in one morning and had this picture and was giggling, handing it to me. And I hung it on the board and I said, thank you. And he's like, you're seriously hanging that up? And I said, yeah. Do you know he stopped sleeping through class? He would look at that picture and feel like I saw him for who he is and appreciated him. And he kind of started doing work. He actually ended up passing with a C by the end, but I had to really work my tail off to help him get there. But this picture started that connection in a very efficient manner. If I would have pulled him inside and said, hey, so what are you into? What are your hobbies? He would have rolled his eyes and went back to sleep. But this is a great spot in your room if you want to make this for next year or maybe a colleague. Now, this is a part in chapter 5, one of the last chapters. We thought, what are some things that you need to know in the classroom but are rarely discussed in a teacher training program? And we thought there are things that sometimes with new teachers, you're like, oh, you'll learn, you'll see. But that actually has us wasting a lot of time. And it's not the smartest way to learn, especially if we're wasting time that we could be building relationships with kids, teaching exciting content with kids. But to have a dynamic classroom, you have to be able to see eye to eye with a colleague, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. What I'm saying is you have to know what to do if you don't see eye to eye with a colleague. So there's a section in here and it says, in our chapter 5, and it says, what if I have a conflict with a colleague? And believe me, raise your hand. You don't have to name names or type in the chat. Have you ever had a conflict with a colleague? Okay. It could have even been like in your grad school classes, in your part-time jobs, just with someone that you have to do work with. Okay, so I don't know. I didn't learn this in college or in my grad school, but I did learn it the hard way when I did have a conflict. And so what I learned from that, and this is also based on talking to teachers that do well in the school with colleagues, but there are a couple tips that you can use from this chapter that will actually help you win and if, and hopefully you don't, but honestly, you probably will, at some point have a conflict with a colleague to keep the momentum going and to keep a dynamic classroom, because that can eat away at your mind. Tip number 1 is focus on the problem at hand and focus on finding a solution. This is not the time to dig up all the things that annoyed you about this person from the past. Focus on the problem and focus on finding a solution. The second one is be willing to compromise, okay, but there's a caveat, especially if it's a colleague you work closely with on a daily basis. So if this is a conflict that you have with maybe a computer teacher you see like once every 2 months, you might not need a compromise. But if it's your co-teacher or if it's your neighboring teacher, you might want to be willing to compromise. And I strongly suggest that you do if you work closely with them on a daily basis. Tip 3 is listen to what your colleague is saying before you respond. Tip 4 is use your compassionate voice to take control of the situation. Do your best to listen with an empathetic ear. You're not just waiting to talk. Tip 5 is a big one to keep a dynamic classroom, especially if this is a conflict with a co-teacher in your classroom or a support staff or a paraprofessional or a paraeducator. is have this conversation away from students and away from other colleagues if possible. There was a mantra my co-teachers and I had is never fight in front of the kids. It's the same as in a household. And what we meant by that is if we're like, wait, should we do this or do that? We had those conversations either on written notes or really quietly, but if there's something that we really didn't agree with, we didn't have that conversation in front of the kids. We had it after school, we came in during lunch, but away from the students. Do not personally insult the colleague during the conversation. Focus on the problem at hand and focus on finding a solution. Failing to do so will only escalate the issue. So focus on not insulting the colleague. Be sure not to point fingers. Some people even do it like pointing fingers. Don't do this, and don't do it with your words. Instead, focus on finding a solution. For major conflicts, you might consider, this is like really major, like something that might cause you to reconsider keeping your job, something that is really affecting your mental well-being, or something that you and this person just can't figure out. Consider asking somebody you trust or an administrator to simply be the mediator for the conversation, but not solve the issue for you. You're not telling on each other. You're having a conversation with that person, with a third party you trust sitting there as a mediator, maybe translating and saying, what I'm hearing her say is, but really use this tactic sparingly. This is not something you want like every month. You want to ask your principal to do every month, but if you really need it, that support is there for you, whether it be through a colleague that you trust, that's kind of a mutual friend or colleague of both of you, or administration's a great way to support you in this. And if applicable to the situation, always think what's best for the students. And that'll usually lead you to the right answer about 99.9% of the time. And then tip 10 is very important around like October, November, and towards the end of the school year. Could it be that my colleague is just tired, stressed, or a bit on edge from being stretched too thin? They might have a lot going on. Maybe there's something going on in their personal life. Maybe they're just like stretched way too thin at school. Maybe they didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Maybe it's 5 days before vacation and they're just ready to start vacation. But maybe it's not you, okay? And just ask yourself that. Maybe there's something going on bigger than you. And tip 11 is maybe the hardest to do, but one of the most important. If the conflict is purely about saving your ego, consider letting it go. Sometimes it's nicer to look like the bigger person and walking away from it rather than winning every battle. Is it about your ego? And that's something that you have to ask yourself. And so the last question I want to address about how to have a dynamic classroom is, and you hear about this, but I go into detail about it, is how do you fill your cup? Because in order to have a dynamic classroom, we have to be 100% or 90 to 100%, or okay, we'll say 80, 100% most days. And so there's two sections we wrote is how do I keep a work-life balance, easier said than done? And how do I make time for serious self-care? So I learned this the hard way. My first year of teaching, I remember it was Friday night and I was teaching that 6th grade math class with an English degree. So I was grading a lot of papers and around 9, and I worked better in the classroom. And so around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps coming down the school hallway because I was still sitting at my desk grading paper after paper after paper. And the principal walked in my room, opened the door, and I thought in my head, he's going to be so proud of me. I'm the hardest working teacher. I'm doing whatever it takes. And he looked around the classroom and he said 2 words without even coming in. He said, go home. And I was like, what? Go home? That's weird. So, I mean, principal's orders, I picked up my stuff and I left because I didn't really understand what he knew is that I was about to burn out. And I did kind of burn out after that first year. I stretched myself so thin because I didn't understand how important it is to keep a work-life balance, which I had none of, or have some serious self-care, which I felt guilty using that time. Because when you don't do this, not filling your cup leads to irritability, conflicts with colleagues, back to my last section. It could lead to horrible things happening to your personal relationships. You could have, you're stretched too thin. It can also lead to headaches and stress. So you're constantly popping the ibuprofen or Tylenol during class because you have these headaches over and over again that you don't have during summer break. But this is all by not filling your cup. And it also leads to potential burnout. So I taught a student teaching seminar at University of San Diego. And towards the end of the semester, the students were looking, I'm not exaggerating, they were looking like this coming in. It was spring semester, their final year. They were full-time student teachers. They were also working on, we had the Cal TPA, some of you might do the Ed TPA. They were also doing, they were in a master's program. Most of them were also working on top of student teaching like twice a week, maybe Starbucks or coaching or something like that. And then also trying to keep up their personal relationships. And so this is what they looked like for our Friday at 4:40 class. And so what I did for that week is it was actually a week about filling your cup and self-care. And I thought, okay, I'm going to show them what it does for you. So instead of a bunch of articles and things like that, I had one assignment for that week. And it was do something that fills your cup. And what I meant by filling your cup, and I explained it to them this way, is something that energizes you, preferably outside, it doesn't have to be, and where you're not talking about the students. So filling your cup wouldn't be like going for a walk with a colleague and talking about all the gossip going on in school or anything, not that you should do that anyway, but sometimes it happens. Filling your cup is things like going to the beach, sitting down and having a dinner with your maybe romantic partner is what one of the students did. And she said, we bought steak and a nice bottle of wine and we didn't talk about the students. And she said, I didn't realize how much I've been doing that and dumping on my partner. And she said it was so nice and she felt energized after because she had that time to kind of nourish her soul. And so some students decided to go rollerblading. One student, one of my A+, maybe perfectionist student, went to the beach without any social media, any technology, and picked up seashells. And she wrote a reflection on how she hadn't felt that present in a couple of years. So what I asked them to do is write a reflection, and only a reflection, but how their students behaved on Monday, if they noticed there was a difference in this behavior management in the classrooms. So they met me on Friday for class. They did the filling your cup assignment on the weekend, and then they thought, how are my students behaving on Monday? Because a lot of them were reporting having really severe behavior management and disengagement issues. And so this is Christina. She's letting us use this picture for the presentation. And she decided to fill her cup by sitting on the couch, reading a newspaper and drinking a LaCroix. And look at the smile on her face. She said she had not just sat down and read a newspaper since she started the program because she had so much to do. But the thing about this is all the students that did this, in the reflection, they wrote that not only were they more energized, not only was a lesson better on Monday because they were present, their students were more connected to the curriculum and the students were more laid back and working more diligently in class. So this is what showed them what filling their cup can do because you are the energetic leader of your classroom. If your cup's not full, the kids might see it and it's going to affect everything and not a way to build a dynamic classroom. So part of a dynamic classroom is taking care of yourself and filling your cup. And most often when you think you don't have the most time to do it is when you need to do it the most. So what else do we need to know about filling your cup? Well, basically when we take time to fill our cup, we're more present for our students the next day. We don't feel resentment towards our class for sacrificing our own time. We're not like, I spend all weekend grading these tests and now, no, we're not resentful because we're taking care of ourselves. We have more to give in the lessons. We're more excited about our lessons. And in turn, guess who else is excited? The students. We're giving our brains a break from teaching. And there's a saying that everything works once you unplug it and plug it back in again, including you. And that's what filling your cup does. And we'll work faster after we recharge because we'll be more refreshed and focused. It's a win-win. And so I'm going to play about a minute of this video here. I know we're running a little short on time.
I think it's really important to balance your work and your life. You don't want to get overwhelmed. As a teacher, we know there is a million things we could always be doing when we get home from school as well. But I think it's important to just kind of shut that off at a certain point and have your own life, because if you don't, you'll get stressed and overwhelmed, and that'll spill over into the classroom, and then your students are being harmed by that.
Yeah, I think it helps me a lot to do things outside of school where I'm kind of forced to completely unplug from the things that we're doing in school. So a lot of times, like, students can email me, students can text me. So if I'm in cell phone service, I'm sort of working all the time. And it helps to go, I do a lot of outdoor sports. So I'll go mountain biking on the weekends, or I run trail races, or I go snowboarding. And those are things where, like, I can't be mountain biking and texting at the same time unless I have a death wish.
Yeah, so the point is that if you do something where you literally have to unplug, it's a really powerful way to fill our cups. And so the last thing I want to talk about is to create a dynamic classroom. To create a dynamic classroom, we have to stand out to our students. And the way we do that is to, hold on a second here, previous. And the way we do that is to be the teacher that we are. And what that means is that there's no other teacher out there like you. There's no other teacher out there like you. And so what that means is there's a lot of different ways to do it, is that you can actually bring your personality into the classroom. So this is Mrs. Lloyd. She's a 10th grade world history teacher and also a retired Navy chief. And so she ran her classroom kind of like the students were sailors on the ship. She has like mantras and nautical jargon. Her class rules, if you look, it even is like she's the captain of the ship, and the students loved it. Then there's Mr. Ballantyne, who's a 12th grade calculus teacher, and he's a big Star Wars fan. And so he brought in Star Wars into a 12th grade AP calculus class. And the students found that calculus wasn't that intimidating because it was kind of funny to them, because he brought his personality into the classroom. And so what you have to ask yourself is, who are you? Are you like the teacher that knows math so well, you could call yourself the professor? Are you the teacher that is into yoga and meditation? Then bring some mandala beads around the classroom, but have the students see that you're more than a teacher to them. You're a human being that gets someone to know them as a human being as well. And so these are the 5 questions I addressed today that might linger in the head of a newer teacher or a teacher in general. Is, how do you energize a sleepy class or calm down a wound up class? How do I connect with the student who challenges me? What if I have a conflict with my colleague? How do I fill my cup? And how do I stand out to my students? And these questions are all covered in How to Create a Dynamic Classroom. And I want to thank you. I'm really excited for you. Okay, we're almost, well, we're one day into August, but you still have almost a month left. But start thinking about next year. I am so excited for you to step into the classroom again and step into the process of making your own dynamic classroom. I look forward to hearing how it's going.
And then just a real big thank you to Serena for that engaging presentation. With great tips for the start of the school year. But yes, we are only on August 1st, so hopefully you all have a couple of weeks to prepare. But thank you again, Serena, and everyone who participated.